be aware that we are recording. If you're not comfortable with that, by all means, step away at this point. So before we go any further, I think it's only appropriate that I introduce your esteemed panel for this webinar. So I'm going to start with David Chandler. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Very quickly, so I work in the tax side of things. I deal with the employment tax, social security. So not actually that much involved in around this area, but some of it around things like remote workers, and payroll giving, etc. Companies are asking me around, so I can answer any questions and include in the debate around that side of things. Great,
thanks, David. And Chloe?
Hello, everybody. My name's Chloe Leyland. I'm a senior associate working with Simon at Horsfield Menzies, employment solicitor, and ready to talk about all things HR, discrimination, everything that you usually expect. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Chloe. And Chris?
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Dias. I'm a solicitor. I specialise in immigration law, and I've been working with Simon and Angus and David and Chloe for a number of years now. And any immigration questions you have on this issue, I'm here for you.
Great. And our special guest today, Simon Hayton. Do you want to say hello?
Hi there, guys. So I'm the CEO of a company called Workforce. We're a specialist talent business that's over the last 15 years has brought about 25,000 people from overseas to start skilled work in the UK. And alongside that, I'm also a counsellor for the CBI. And for my sins, I advise on things like skill shortages and various other aspects of sort of international recruitment.
Great. And Simon, you're also part of a task force, aren't you, which we're going to hear a little bit about later?
Yeah, sure. You've probably seen in the press there's been a number of companies that are offering help to try and see if there's a way to to find employment for these individuals coming out of the Ukraine. So yeah, very, very early stages, but yeah, I've been having some conversations on that side of things.
Great stuff. Thank you. And to those who are on the call, rather than sort of opening this up for a free for all, I think probably the best way to do it is if you've either got a question as we're going along, or you just want to make a comment, because actually we're interested to hear your views as well, then just use that chat function. You'll be well used to doing that, and yeah, please do contribute to the debate as we go along. But just to kind of launch our thinking around this, I mean, it's quite timely, isn't it, that we're doing the webinar today, because it is 1 month ago exactly, on the 24th of February, that Russia invaded Ukraine with devastating consequences for Ukrainians. Not just those in Ukraine, but the impacts have been felt by the wider diaspora across Europe, across the world, actually. And shockwaves felt around those neighbouring countries, around the NATO countries here in the UK. I was thinking about it, in some ways, nothing changes for us here in the UK. We're not being attacked in any kind of military sense, and in some ways everything has changed. David and I were just talking about this before. It's as if the Iron Curtain has descended, or is descending once again. And of course we've had much sort of panic talk about this being the start of World War III. We're all starting to feel some of the financial pressures alongside our cost of living crisis, concerns about fuel and so on. And perhaps another reason for mental health in our country to be affected is this latest crisis that we're having to contend with, hot on the heels of COVID. More positively, I've been really encouraged to see that kind of outpouring of compassion, that desire to help, the kind of task force stuff that Simon's been talking about, but other humanitarian initiatives as well. And we've seen companies that have embraced that through fundraising, lots of social media posts, and people opening up their homes. So I think it's fair to say that one way or another, this is going to be affecting us as employers and HR professionals here in the UK. So it's worth spending this next half hour or so just thinking through some of the issues. So we're going to be looking at the HR response, what we've seen so far from some of our clients and what we've observed. We're going to think through some of the employment law issues and particularly spend a good chunk of time focusing on the immigration issues and how we can support through perhaps offering jobs to those from the regions and some of the challenges that throws up and how we can get around them. So I hope that sounds okay. We'll perhaps move on now just to think through the HR response and the sort of things that we've seen either through social media posts or actually through discussions with our own clients. And there's been a great response and actually a real willingness I've seen amongst the HR community to share ideas. It's almost like this open source approach to solutions, which I think HR are great at. And what we've tended to see is almost like a tiered approach, because organisations will have people who are directly affected by this, either employees in the region or nationals from Ukraine or Russia working in their organisation in the UK. There will be other people from around the Ukraine and Russia, from the countries bordering there, who are going to be affected. And there'll be those who are here in the UK who've got family or friends, loved ones in the region who'll be extremely worried. And the kind of support that I've seen so far is perhaps what you'd expect. So people immediately jump to EAP employment assistance programs, perhaps underpinned by occupational health support, and that seems to be the kind of standard port of call. I don't know what people's experience of that is. It seems to me that that is a reactive approach to dealing with things, whereas one of my clients I know has actually been in touch with the EAP provider to say, right, what specific initiatives have you got that you can roll out in our workplace to assist people who are affected by this, whether it's mental health days and focused initiatives on well-being and so on. And it seems to me that's the better approach, rather than just signposting people to EAP and telling them to kind of crack on with it themselves. The other support that I've seen, of course, there's time off work. One of my clients said something that really helped me, actually. That they said they were approaching this almost in the same way as you would a bereavement issue. So allowing time off work, almost compassionate leave for those who are directly affected in one way or another. And that, of course, can be paid or unpaid, depending on how you want to introduce that. Another client has said to me, what they're very conscious of is that people who need to reach out to family in the region in their office, which is an open plan office, will find that very difficult. So they've set up some private meeting room that can be booked out and used for those kind of calls, which I thought was a good suggestion. But more generally, what I've been hearing is the idea that communicating with the workforce is the most important thing. So presenting those opportunities for a conversation amongst the team. And Chloe, we did that recently, didn't we, as a Horsfield Menzies team? Any comments on that?
Yeah, no, it was interesting, wasn't it, when we were having our weekly team meeting, and it was actually Angus, wasn't it, that basically brought it up and just asked how we were all coping with it. And you know, it's introducing those kind of, I suppose, honest conversations where we can all start the meeting and say, oh yes, everything's fine, but actually, really, you know, Simon alluded to at the start, there's been a lot for people to cope with. You know, I appreciate it. It's different for you directly affected by the Ukrainian crisis, but I think even even still as a sort of UK national without any specific Ukrainian ties, this comes off the back of a very difficult period with COVID, and then the concern around Ukraine, and it does take a toll on people's mental health. And I think it's just part of a wider conversation that employers are having regarding, just checking in really with employees and seeing how they're doing and how they're coping with this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's been part of the modus operandi, hasn't it, for the last couple of years, as we've all had to adapt to working from home and the mental health challenges that's presented during lockdown. And it's a continuation of that. I think it's a good practice that employers have got into, but now that things are returning to new normal, as it were, let's not abandon those things that we've learned, and let's keep them going, especially during these times.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the other question that has kind of crossed my mind is the extent to which the employer should be making their staff aware of what the corporate response is to what's going on. And I've seen a lot of kind of noble posts on LinkedIn by organisations. Clearly there will be some who are more nervous about doing that than others, depending on the nature of their business and how cautious they are about those kind of press releases. Simon, is that something you've had to think about in terms of communicating to your workforce, the corporate response to what's been going on?
Yeah, I mean, we've got around about 40 of our team are European. I guess we're still European, but actual Europeans. And yeah, I mean, a lot of those guys and girls are sort of Polish. We've got some Romanian, some Moldovan. So there's been a definite impact. You were saying there around people's sort of mental state of mind and how they're sort of feeling with this. And I know certainly we, depending on which newspaper you pick up, we've got a sort of a commentary in this country, haven't we, of the Baltics will be next and this kind of stuff. And actually, if you're Polish and your family are back home in Poland, and that war is 100 miles away, that's a pretty scary situation. And I think it's easy to forget. I mean, I suppose another example, one of our team is from Moldova. His father was a senior colonel in the Moldovan army, retired about 10 years ago, and I think it was about a week after the conflict started, was immediately re-enlisted. And his father in his late 50s, he's now literally at battle stations. So I think that would be my my point. We don't have any actual Ukrainians in our business. However, I think for those that multicultural sort of society that we've got in Britain, a lot of those Eastern Europeans and other nationalities in Europe are, I'm guessing, sort of relatively a lot more nervous, as you said at the beginning. We're quite distant, aren't we? But I think there's a lot of people in this country probably getting very nervous.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. So yeah, I mean, those were the main things that I'd thought in terms of practical support that can be offered. I'd be interested if people have thought of anything else within their organisation and you're on the call, or if David and Chris, you've come across anything, then by all means share that. And those who don't have their mics on, just use that chat facility to share any additional thoughts, because we'd really appreciate those. I guess then that leads me on to think about some of the employment law considerations, and I just mentioned a couple of times social media posts, and that can open up a whole can of worms, can't it, when one of your members of staff posts something inappropriate, either on LinkedIn, that sort of more professional environment, or perhaps more likely on one of the other social media interfaces where they're perhaps being a little less guarded in what they say. Chloe, any kind of words of wisdom in terms of how you well, one, approach that if it happens, and two, prevent it from happening in the first place?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'd always recommend a social media policy, which should really quite clearly set out what is and is not acceptable. And just to be aware, obviously, if you're talking about a platform like Facebook, a lot of people's profiles will say where they work. And if you're posting on Facebook and it can be identifiable as to what company you're working for, then there's always a risk, isn't there, that that could be seen to be a comment made on behalf of the company that you work for. So very difficult, it gets into a very difficult territory if employees are starting to come out with comments that obviously wouldn't be supported in the workplace. So yeah, that's definitely have a good social media policy in place. That's a very good starting point, I'd say.
Yeah, good. A couple of other questions that have come my way. So we've got this phenomenon of, dreadful phrase, but war tourism. People who just are drawn to the region either because they want to sign up as mercenaries and join the fight, or they just want to be in that region for whatever reason. And then, you know, military reservists. It may be that Ukrainian nationals who might be working for employers in the UK are actually called up to go back and fight. I think they have been, haven't they? And what do we do in those circumstances? And of course, UK employment law as it stands doesn't directly address that issue. It's different from our UK reservists. So my advice has been there, really, the most appropriate response is to suggest to that person that they might consider resigning from their employment, but with a reassurance that, you know, at the point that they do come back, any application for future employment would be looked at favourably. Seems to me that that's the most appropriate way to deal with that kind of situation, because otherwise you just don't know how long they're going to be away for and what can happen. It may be appropriate in those circumstances just to point out to them that they're not covered by life insurance, not covered by medical insurance and so on, because they're no longer employed. Make sure they're aware of those kind of issues. For those who just up sticks and go, and we heard about that household cavalry guard who just deserted his post, and I think he's going to be in trouble. But, you know, for people in your organisation, if that does happen, I suppose at some point we might be looking at a frustration of contract argument, depending on whether they've maintained any contact with you as their employer or not. And then Chloe, I think you mentioned, I think it was you that mentioned discrimination issues. I guess I'm acutely aware of the fact that, you know, anti-Russian sentiment is running pretty high at the moment. To the extent,
I think it's a reminder, isn't it, about the, you know, nationality can form part of a potential complaint of race discrimination, and just to be aware of that and be aware of, again, having your policies and, you know, and make sure that the training is up to date, and so people are aware of what is and what is not acceptable.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that as part of any internal communication that we talked about before, making those points about respecting everyone and is really important, isn't it? So yeah, those were the main employment law considerations that I thought of arising out of this. But I suppose this is the point where we pivot a little bit and start to think about a different kind of practical help that is being talked about, and that is very much around recruiting people from the Ukraine or the surrounding countries to help relieve the pressure on them, get them out of that situation. Difficult for the men who 18 to 16-year-olds have been told they cannot leave the country, but of course women and children can. Chris, what routes are open to employers who might want to do their bit by employing Ukrainian nationals?
Well, I mean, the British government have opened 2 new schemes specifically for Ukrainians. One is the Ukraine Family Scheme, which allows Ukrainians who have a family member in the UK to apply to come to the UK on a 3-year visa. This is not a refugee visa, so it's bypassing the refugee system. It's mainly due to family contact, and it gives them this 3-year visa straight away. They don't have to prove that they're seeking refuge or that they're fleeing something. It's taken as a given. So it's a brand new type of scheme for the UK government, and basically you just have to show that you do have a family member, and it's quite wide. It covers normal family members like spouses, children, parents, fiancés, unmarried partners as well. But it also takes in extended family members, so children over 18, grandparents, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, mothers and fathers-in-law, brothers and sisters-in-law as well, if you want to sponsor your brother or sister-in-law, and also the family of those extended family members. So if you sponsor your brother-in-law, he can bring his wife and kids as well. So thousands of people are going to be able to qualify under this scheme, and they'll all be able to come into the UK with an automatic right to work for 3 years. So for employers, this will alleviate them of having to do the visa sponsorship side of things. They'll have a workforce who are coming to the UK with a right to work already. I think Simon from Workforce was saying earlier, a lot of these people obviously are going to be traumatized. They're going to be women and children because the men aren't allowed to leave Ukraine. So one of the rights this visa has is there's no minimum hours of working. So you could take on people as part-time workers. This is one way companies can definitely help, I think, once people have this visa. The other scheme that the government have brought in is the Ukraine sponsorship scheme, and this is what's been widely advertised, where people can give a room in their house to somebody from Ukraine. And the people who will qualify for that from Ukraine are people who don't have family ties in the UK at all. There's some confusion as to how it's going to tie up this sponsorship from the UK person who's giving their room to the person from Ukraine, how they're going to get here. But once they do get here, again, they're going to get this 3-year visa with the right to work, and again, working part-time or full-time. There's no restrictions on that. So again, there'll be a lot of people who will be coming to the UK and potentially can work straight away. So we have thousands of people who will come in that way. But along with that, the government have also kept the normal visa routes. So for example, skilled worker route is still there. So if you have someone who's, for example, in Poland, they've gone over the border, they've got a right to stay in Poland, but you want to bring them over to UK, they can come over under the normal skilled worker route. But obviously that does involve the employer issuing a certificate of sponsorship and sponsoring them the normal way. The difference, the concessions they've introduced though, are that they can apply at their local visa office. They don't have to apply from Ukraine. Wherever they are, they can go to the nearest UK visa office to make the application. So there might be some way for employers to get skilled talent that way, rather than waiting for people to come to the UK. They can reach out to the refugees who are not yet in the UK and see if there's people who they could bring over that route.
I can see that is going to really open up that talent pool, and Simon, I'll be interested in your views on that in a moment. Chris, there's one specific question. I'm not sure whether you will know the answer to this off the top of your head, but it's a question about the government's position on recruiting Ukrainians as apprentices. It may well be. I don't know whether there's a specific restriction there.
There would be if they don't have a visa, yeah, because at the moment it's not a visa route. So if, for example, they qualified, for example, say you wanted to recruit someone as an apprentice, and one of your existing workforce, is on the Ukraine sponsor scheme. They've got a house or a room in their house. Then that's one way to do it, because you can connect the apprentice to your worker, they'll get the 3-year visa. So that would be one way to do it, bypassing any restrictions on the working route.
Great, thanks, Chris. So Simon, this is opening up potentially a really significant pool of talent for UK employers, and as I understand it from chats we've had, that is a real issue in the UK at the moment. There is a talent gap.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. There's as I said at the top of the call, I mean, we've spent 15 years in manufacturing, hospitality, healthcare, technology, and the talent shortages have never been more severe. Obviously exacerbated with COVID and Brexit and everything else. I think my general observations about Ukraine in the context of employment is, and you sort of already alluded to this, Chris, but I think certainly when I talk to clients that over the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's been a very much a sentiment of we'd like to help. I had one very large technology firm say to me last week, we just want to sponsor a load of Ukrainian tech people because we want to help them get out of there. The reality is, and certainly what we're seeing is the majority of the people are going to neighbouring countries. So we've obviously already seen the sort of Baltic or Eastern European countries are the ones where they're tending to land. I think the sentiment and the feeling on the ground is that a lot of that is because, you know, they're a very proud nation, and I think a lot of these people will want to go home. What they've got left to go home to is probably a different discussion, unfortunately. But certainly, I think there's a feeling that they're not seeing this as an opportunity to go to the West or go to America, or, you know, I think they are genuinely fleeing, you know, the horrors, but would want to go back. I think the second part is, as you've said, the majority of the people then leaving right now are women with children, and you know, what mental state are they in to even consider trying to work in you know, in the coming weeks or even maybe months. But for sure, I think, and then the third part obviously is the men, and the men have been conscripted, and so it will be some time, you would imagine, before there's going to be any kind of meaningful ceasefire. All that being said, I think there's huge goodwill towards the Ukrainian population, as evidenced, as I say, by that tech firm last week who said, you know, we just want to hire some developers from the Ukraine because it's going to help them. I think what goes alongside that, and I don't know if our guests would sort of share this view, but I know myself as, you know, as a business owner, I think there's always that juxtaposition of not wanting to look like you're sort of, you're seeing a commercial opportunity in this, if that makes sense. And I think it's such early days, isn't it, that I think a lot of people are certainly mindful of, you know, of being seen to, you know, I saw something on LinkedIn. I think it was, you know, somebody saying, oh, well, you know, all these Eastern Europeans that went home after Brexit will be able to replenish them with Ukraine. And it's sort of a little bit, you know, it doesn't leave the best taste, does it? So I think with it being such a new phenomenon and what's going on, I think there is still a little bit of that. And then perhaps just the last thing, if I can, was you mentioned about the sort of effort that's going on with this sort of collaboration, and I've been talking to Emma Sinclair, who's heading that up, and there's a number of major retailers, national businesses that are looking to do something. I think the reality, though, is, and what we've offered as our part of this, because we've got expertise in relocating people from one country to the UK, we've got a relatively unique proposition where we can step in and try and help. But I think certainly looking at some of these large national businesses that are seeing if they can play a part, I think there's just a little bit of a challenge at the moment as to it's on such a huge magnitude, this problem of, you know, if Tesco said they'll employ 3,000 people in their distribution centres, you know, that's 3,000 homes that need finding, and, you know, it's a pretty large problem, this, and you know, I'm sure in the coming days and weeks it will start to unfold, but it's hard to really sort of, I think, being honest, put an accurate sort of lens on exactly how this is all going to work. And I think, Chris, probably the last 2 weeks, you know, there's been a lot more clarity on the visa side, but visas is one thing, you know, bringing this, you know, mooted 100,000 people to the country, you know, that's a lot of logistics, a lot of bedrooms, a lot of schools and everything else. So I do think it's probably a moving beast, and it will evolve in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Simon. I mean, I suppose the other way we could look at it, rather than bringing the talent to the UK, is employing the talent to work for UK companies remotely, so they can do that from the region. David, I know we've talked about that, and Chris, we have in the past. It gives rise with a few interesting tax questions, doesn't it? Any very high level observations on that?
The only thing from a tax perspective I always say to just bear in mind is that generally you pay tax where you work.
Yeah.
So if you're going to employ people or engage people in certain countries, then you will be paying tax in there. As you know, it's only been a month, so the timing's so short, but as of yet, no countries have come up with anything from a tax relief perspective to help offset that, because I think the focus is more on, from an immigration perspective, how do we get these people in those countries quickly? Tax will follow at certain points.
Yeah. Anything to add on that, Chris, in terms of the remote worker?
Well, yeah, I mean, as far as the European response, they were quicker to offer right to stay and work. So, for example, anyone who crossed over to the European Union does have a right to work in the European Union. So there'd be no problem from immigration point of view for a UK company to employ someone remotely.
Yeah, that's a good shout. Thank you.
The only other bit, Simon, I would at least confirm to people, because often, as with our UK government, without bashing them, they often like giving with one hand, taking away with the other. And the payment that is being made that Chris mentioned before for the people coming in, it is a tax-free payment. So that £350, you're not going to be taxed on it at the end of the year.
Good to know. Thank you. The other point that I didn't ask you, David, earlier, and I should have done, and you were very polite because you didn't force the issue, but one response that we've seen from employers, of course, has been all around fundraising, because that is something that employers can practically do, and they can help their employees to do. And you mentioned payroll giving. Is it worth giving us a very quick overview on that?
Yeah, it's a very quick. It's quite fairly simple. Obviously, companies can set up schemes so that then they can show their employees they are doing things. They put these schemes in place. In terms of how it works, obviously the employees can then pay, give their amount, and if they're a base rate taxpayer, they give 80p. The government will give the tax relief directly to the charities. So there are payroll agencies that do this, and there are lots of charities that are helping specifically with Ukraine, including UNICEF, Save the Children, ActionAid, etc. But in terms of setting it up, you can set it up as a company, and then your employees can then donate direct from their salaries. So they pay it, they get the tax relief at source. So again, it's just a benefit from their side, because they're doing something, and from a corporate side, you're seen to be doing something as well. So it helps that message.
And a lot of employers match, don't they? But I don't think you have to. Is that right?
You don't have to match. No, it's entirely up to you. You can just set it up. There's often a small administration fee with doing it. But yeah, some companies would then match those contributions that employees choose to make, but that's entirely voluntary.
Excellent. Okay. Good. Well, unless there's any closing thoughts from our panel or any questions from those who are remaining viewing and listening to what we're doing, then it's probably the right time to bring this to a call. So is there anything? I can see someone typing. Closing thoughts from the panel?
No, the only point I would just add is it might be worth picking up a conversation separately, David. We do a lot of work with tech companies that ask us to find nearshore remote workers, and the majority of that relationship is based on a sort of freelancer basis. So they will pay their own taxes as in effect a self-employed person if they're in Poland or Romania or whatever, and then they freelance contract with the UK entity. I mean, I think that could be, certainly with a lot of these tech people. I mean, Ukraine's obviously got a huge tech community. I could imagine that once these individuals have perhaps left the Ukraine, if they land in Poland or these types of countries, you can imagine a lot of them maybe working remotely, offshore, nearshore, for UK-based companies, and certainly that's a conversation we've already started to have, and I think that might end up being where, purely talking about the employment side, that might end up being something where this ends up playing out, where these guys and girls end up staying close to home, working, perhaps doing a service for British businesses, but they sort of have the best of both worlds, and I could definitely see that evolving.
Yeah. That's where, you have to just be a little bit careful, as Simon Horsfield mentioned earlier, in terms of this. There are considerations where you've got large people that might be working for your business in another jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Just one thing to bear in mind.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to bring this webinar to a close. I'm going to thank our panel for their contribution. Thank those of you who joined us, and just take this opportunity to plug the next webinar in this mini series, which is in 2 weeks' time. Invitations will be coming out this week, and that is going to be focusing really in much more detail on this issue of bringing in talent from overseas. So Simon from Workforce is going to join us again. Chris will be giving us the benefit of his expertise in terms of the immigration advice, and we're going to think really practically about routes to entry and how you can support and facilitate that relocation process. So really looking forward to that one in 2 weeks' time. And with that, I will bring this webinar to a close and say cheerio, see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.